The war room on Corellia Prime felt like a tomb. Admiral Vextar stood before the massive holographic display, watching red markers spread across their territory like blood in water. Each red dot meant another world lost, another billion lives, consumed by the nightmare that called itself the Void Swarm. Report, Vextar commanded, though he dreaded the answer. Commander Talon's forearms trembled as he manipulated the controls. His insect-like features couldn't hide his terror. Colony 79 went silent 3 hours ago. That makes 12 worlds in 14 days, sir. The pattern is accelerating. The Admiral's crystalline eyes reflected the dying light of each lost world. The Corellian Empire had ruled this sector for 3,000 years. They had conquered lesser species, built mighty fleets, and considered themselves the apex of galactic civilization. Now they watched helplessly as something from the void between galaxies devoured everything they had built. Show me the tactical analysis of their last engagement, Vextar ordered. The hologram shifted, displaying the final moments of the Fourth Fleet. Massive biomechanical creatures, each the size of a city, swarmed over Corellian battleships. The aliens' advanced plasma cannons lit up space with brilliant energy, tearing through the first wave of attackers. For a moment, it looked like the fleet might win. Then the second wave arrived. The creatures had changed, their hulls now absorbed the plasma fire, converting the energy to fuel their own weapons. What had killed them minutes before now made them stronger. They learn from every attack, Talon said, his voice breaking. Our best scientists estimate they can adapt to any weapon in 6 hours or less. Every battle makes them harder to kill. Vex closed his eyes. The Corellian Empire had protocols for invasion, rebellion, even civil war. But they had no protocol for fighting an enemy that became immune to their weapons faster than they could develop new ones. Sir, another officer called out. Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer rim. The swarm is massing near the Delta Junction. If they break through there, they'll have a clear path to the core worlds. Vextar finished, including Corellia Prime, his home, his family, everything he had sworn to protect. The Admiral walked to the ancient terminal in the corner of the war room. Dust covered the activation panel. No Corellian had touched these controls in over 2,000 years. Admiral, what are you doing? Talon asked, activating the ancient protocol. The room fell silent. Every officer present knew the stories, the legends passed down from their ancestors. Long ago, when the galaxy was young and wild, civilizations had agreed to help each other in times of ultimate crisis. The protocol would send a distress beacon to every known species, including those in the quarantine zones. Sir, you can't be serious. Some of those sectors were quarantined for good reason. The species there are dangerous, unpredictable. They might be worse than the swarm. Vextar's finger hovered over the activation switch. Commander, in 14 days, these creatures have done what our enemies couldn't accomplish in 3 millennia. They've brought the Corellian Empire to its knees. Dangerous and unpredictable might be exactly what we need. He pressed the button. The beacon launched from Corellia Prime, carrying the Corellian Empire's desperate plea across the galaxy. It would reach every known civilization, translated into thousands of languages, carrying one simple message: help us. We are dying. Meanwhile, 3 jumps away in a system marked with warning symbols in every galactic database, Captain Jake Morrison was enjoying his morning coffee aboard the UES Defiance. The human ship looked small compared to vessels, built for efficiency rather than intimidation. Jake preferred it that way. Humans had learned long ago that the deadliest predators rarely looked the part. The bridge was quiet in the early shift. Most of the crew was still sleeping, and Jake liked these peaceful moments before the day began. He was reading reports from Earth when every console on the bridge suddenly lit up. Lieutenant Amy Chen rushed from her station to his captain's chair. "Sir, we've got something big." The communications array is picking up a galaxy-wide transmission. It's using the old emergency protocols. Jake set down his coffee. How old are we talking? Pre-human contact. This is ancient stuff, Captain. The translation matrix is working overtime, but the message is clear. It's a distress call from something called the Krellian Empire. They're asking for help against what they call a void swarm. Jake studied the data streaming across his screen. The message contained tactical information, casualty reports, and sensor data that painted a grim picture. 12 worlds consumed, entire fleets destroyed, an enemy that adapted to every weapon used against it. How far are they? Jake asked. 3 hyperspace jumps, sir. We could be there in 18 hours. Jake nodded thoughtfully. He'd heard of the Krellian Empire. They were one of the older civilizations, proud and militaristic. The kind of species that looked down on younger races like humanity. For them to send out a galaxy-wide distress call meant they were facing extinction. Captain, Amy continued, there's something else. According to our star charts, the Krellian Empire has never responded to distress calls from other species. They've got a reputation for leaving other civilizations to fend for themselves. Jake smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Well then, Amy, looks like we're about to teach them about human nature. Plot a course for Krellia Prime. Maximum speed. Sir, are you sure? We're just one ship. If this void swarm destroyed entire Krellian fleets, Jake stood up, his expression hardening. Amy, where I come from, when someone calls for help, you answer, even if they're not your friends. Even if they've never helped you before. That's what makes us human. He paused, looking out at the stars rushing past. Besides, something that can adapt to any weapon sounds like exactly the kind of challenge humanity was born to handle. The youth's defiance tore through hyperspace like a bullet through silk. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel blur past the view screen. In 18 hours, they had crossed half the galaxy to answer a distress call from people who had never shown humanity any kindness. Dropping out of hyperspace in 3.2.1 announced Lieutenant Amy Chen from her navigation station. Reality snapped back into focus. Before them hung Nexus Prime, the crown jewel of the Krellian Empire. The planet gleamed like a blue-green marble, surrounded by massive orbital defense platforms that could vaporize an entire fleet. Jake had seen the technical specifications in their databases. Each platform packed enough firepower to crack a moon. Every single one of those weapons was now pointed directly at the Defiance. Captain, we're being scanned, reported Ensign Rick Torres from the sensor station. Multiple targeting locks. They're not taking any chances. Jake nodded calmly. Open a channel. All frequencies. The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of the ship's engines. Jake straightened his uniform and looked directly into the communication array. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Defiance. We received your distress call and have come to assist. Please respond. For long seconds, nothing happened. The orbital weapons remained locked on their position. Jake could feel the tension radiating from his crew. One wrong move, and they would be atomized before they could blink. Then the reply came. The voice was mechanical, filtered through translation software, but Jake could hear the desperation underneath. Human vessel. This is Nexus Prime Defense Command. You claim to respond to our distress beacon. What forces do you bring? Jake looked around his bridge at the 40 crew members on duty. Through the ship's corridors, another 160 humans went about their daily routines. Compared to the massive Krellian fleets they had seen in the tactical reports, the Defiance was smaller than a life pod. We bring ourselves, Jake replied simply. Request permission to come aboard and discuss the situation. There was another long pause. Jake could imagine the conversation happening on the other end. The Krellians had probably expected a massive human armada, thousands of ships carrying millions of soldiers. Instead, they got one medium-sized vessel with a crew that could fit in a high school gymnasium. Permission granted, came the eventual reply. Transport to coordinate 7. Be aware that you will be under guard at all times. Jake smiled, understood. Energizing transport beam now. The familiar tingle of molecular disassembly washed over him, and the bridge of the Defiance faded away. A moment later, he materialized on what was clearly the command center of the Krellian fleet. The room was enormous, filled with holographic displays and alien technology that hummed with barely contained energy. But what struck Jake most were the Krellians themselves. The aliens towered over him, easily 8 feet tall, with 4 arms, ending in razor-sharp claws. Their insect-like faces held compound eyes that glittered with intelligence, and their chitinous armor looked like it could stop bullets. They were built for war, every inch of them designed for combat and conquest. At least 6 of them had their hands on their weapons when Jake appeared. "Easy there, gentlemen," Jake said, raising his hands peacefully. "I'm here to help, Admiral." Vexter stepped forward, his crystalline eyes studying the human with obvious confusion. Jake looked almost comically small next to the alien commander. Where the Krellians were all sharp edges and natural weapons, Jake appeared soft, vulnerable. His skin looked paper-thin compared to their armored hides. His single pair of arms seemed pathetically inadequate next to their 4. "You came," Vextar said, his words distorted by the translation device grafted to his throat. "But ... where is your fleet? Where are your armies?" Jake gestured to himself, and then to Lieutenant Tom Bradley, who had transported down with him. Tom was examining the Krellian technology with obvious interest, completely unbothered by the weapons trained on them. "This is it," Jake said calmly. 200 crew members aboard one ship. Now, Admiral, I'd appreciate it if you could brief us on this Void Swarm situation. Time seems to be important here." The Krellians exchanged glances that needed no translation. Jake could read their expressions easily enough: disappointment, confusion, the dawning realization that their saviors were a handful of soft-skinned bipeds who looked like they couldn't survive a stiff breeze. Commander Talon activated a holographic display in the center of the room. The image that appeared made even Jake's experienced eyes widen. Writhing biomechanical nightmares filled the space above them, each creature the size of a Krellian battleship. They moved with organic fluidity, but displayed mechanical precision. Worst of all, they seemed to be learning, adapting, evolving in real time. "They consume everything in their path," Talon explained, his 4 arms gesturing at different parts of the display. "Metal becomes part of their wholes. Organic matter feeds their growth. Energy weapons only make them stronger. We have thrown our finest fleets at them, used our most advanced weapons. Nothing works for long." Jake studied the tactical data flowing past the hologram. Casualties in the billions. 12 worlds stripped bare. Adaptation times that were getting shorter with each engagement. "These creatures," Jake said, "how fast can they adapt to new threats?" "Our scientists estimate 6 hours maximum," Talon replied. "Usually less. They faced our plasma cannons for the first time 3 weeks ago. By the second battle, they had developed immunity. By the third, they were using our own energy against us." Lieutenant Tom Bradley stepped forward, his eyes bright with interest. He had the look of a man solving a particularly challenging puzzle. 6 hours, huh? That's their adaptation cycle." "At most," Vextar confirmed. "Why do you ask?" Tom grinned, and Jake recognized that expression. It was the same look Tom got when he figured out how to hack an impossible security system or jury-rig a solution from spare parts and duct tape. "Because, Admiral," Tom said cheerfully, "humans adapt in about 6 minutes. On a good day, we can manage it in 30 seconds. The Krellians stared at him in stunned silence. Vextar's translator made confused buzzing sounds as it tried to process what it had just heard. 6 minutes. The Admiral repeated. That's impossible. No species can evolve that quickly. Jake smiled, and there was something predatory in that expression. Admiral, you're thinking about biological evolution. We're talking about tactical adaptation. Humans have been fighting each other for our entire history. We've gotten very good at changing our approach when the current one stops working. Tom was already pulling up data on his tablet, cross-referencing the Void Swarm's attack patterns with human military doctrine. See, these creatures are impressive, but they're following predictable patterns. They encounter a threat, analyze it, develop a countermeasure, implement the solution. Very logical, very efficient, and very slow, Jake added. By human standards, anyway. Admiral Vexstar looked between the two humans, his expression unreadable. You truly believe you can defeat an enemy that has destroyed our greatest fleets? Jake looked at the holographic display showing the approaching Void Swarm. Sensors indicated they would reach Nexus Prime in less than 48 hours. The fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance. Admiral, Jake said quietly, humans come from a world where everything tries to kill us from the moment we're born. We've been dealing with things that adapt and evolve for thousands of years. The difference is, we learn to adapt faster than anything else on our planet. He paused, meeting the aliens' compound eyes. These creatures think they're the ultimate predators. They're about to meet something they've never encountered before. Prey that fights back harder than they attack. The emergency sirens on Nexus Prime screamed like wounded animals. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the long-range sensors paint a picture that would give most commanders nightmares. The Void Swarm was coming. Space itself seemed to tear open as the creatures emerged from hyperspace. They didn't arrive in neat formations like civilized fleets. Instead, they poured through reality like oil through a broken dam, a writhing mass of biomechanical horrors that blocked out entire starfields. Each creature was unique, as if evolution had gone mad and started mixing organic tissue with alien technology. Dear God, whispered Ensign Rick Torres from his sensor station. There are thousands of them. Jake counted the contacts on his tactical display. 3,412 individual bioships, each one the size of a city. The largest creatures registered as long as Manhattan Island and twice as wide. They moved with fluid grace that no artificial construct should possess, rippling through space like schools of massive, predatory fish. The remaining Krellian fleet moved to intercept. Admiral Vexstar's voice crackled over the communications channel, tight with barely controlled fear. All vessels, form defensive pattern Delta-9. Concentrate fire on the largest human vessel. Retreat to the inner system immediately. You cannot face this swarm with one ship. Jake looked around his bridge. Lieutenant Amy Chen was coordinating with the navigation systems. Lieutenant Tom Bradley was running final checks on their experimental weapons. Lieutenant Lisa Parker was managing communications, while Ensign Rick Torres monitored enemy movements. 40 humans on the bridge, 200 total on the ship, facing an enemy that had already consumed billions of lives. Jake smiled. Amy, initiate Protocol 7. All hands to battle stations. Protocol 7, sir. Amy's eyes widened. Are you sure? We've never tested it in actual combat. First time for everything. Tom, I want those gravity mines deployed in a scattered pattern. Make it look random, but give us maximum coverage. Tom's fingers flew over his console. Gravity mines armed and ready. Captain, loading tubes 1 through 20. Jake turned to Lisa at the communications station. Lisa, I want you to start broadcasting Mozart's Requiem on all frequencies. Full power. Lieutenant Lisa Parker looked up from her controls, confusion clear on her face. Sir, why classical music? Jake's grin widened. Because, Lisa, if we're going to introduce the galaxy to human warfare, we might as well do it with style. The EU's Defiance launched a spread of devices that looked like oversized metal basketballs. To the Krellian observers, they appeared to be escape pods or perhaps some kind of defensive buoys. The Krellians had never encountered gravity manipulation technology before. In their experience, warfare was about bigger guns, thicker armor, and more ships. Humans had learned to think differently. The gravity mines scattered throughout the system, each one creating an invisible well of twisted space-time. They were completely undetectable until something large enough triggered them. Jake watched his tactical display as the devices took position, forming a three-dimensional web of potential destruction. The first wave of void swarm creatures hit the gravity wells like moths flying into a spider's web. The bioships that had shrugged off planet-killing weapons were suddenly compressed into balls of twisted metal and flesh. In seconds, over 200 of the creatures were reduced to debris. The Krellian fleet cheered over the communication channels. For a moment, it looked like the humans had found a miracle weapon. Then the second wave arrived. The bioships had changed. Their hulls were now thicker, reinforced with what looked like crystalline structures. They moved more carefully, probing ahead with smaller organisms that triggered the gravity mines harmlessly. When they encountered the invisible traps, they simply absorbed the gravitational energy and moved on. Adaptation complete, Tom reported, checking his sensors. 57 minutes from first contact to full immunity. They're getting faster. Admiral. Vextar's voice filled the bridge, heavy with despair. Human vessel, your weapons have failed. Retreat while you still can. Jake ignored the Krellian commander. Instead, he opened an internal channel to his crew. All hands, this is the captain. What you're about to see is why humans have survived on Earth for 200,000 years. We don't win because we're stronger, or faster, or smarter than our predators. We win because we never stop adapting. He switched to the fleet-wide channel. Admiral Vextar, all Krellian vessels fall back to the asteroid belt. We're going to show these creatures what humans call thinking outside the box. Captain Morrison, you cannot be serious. The asteroid belt is a death trap. There's nowhere to maneuver. Exactly, Jake replied. Amy, take us into the belt. Full speed. The U's Defiance dove toward the massive ring of rocky debris that surrounded Nexus Prime's outer system. The asteroids ranged from pebbles to mountains, spinning through space in chaotic patterns that would challenge even the best pilots. It was the last place any sane commander would choose for a battle. Tom Bradley was already working on his next surprise. Captain, I'm reading the mineral composition of these asteroids. Lots of iron, nickel, and something the sensors can't identify. Whatever it is, it's dense. Perfect. Lisa, are you still broadcasting Mozart? Yes, sir. The Requiem is playing on all frequencies. Jake nodded. Good. Let them hear what they're dying to. Tom, I want you to target the largest asteroids with our mining charges. Not to destroy them, to move them. Tom's eyes lit up with understanding. Kinetic bombardment. We're going to turn the asteroids into weapons. Exactly. These creatures can adapt to energy weapons, but they can't adapt to physics. A mountain-sized rock moving at orbital velocity hits just as hard, whether you're a bioship or a regular starship. The Void Swarm followed them into the asteroid belt, confident in their ability to adapt to whatever new weapon the humans might deploy. They had faced energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, even exotic matter weapons. They had adapted to everything. They had never faced an enemy that turned an entire solar system into a weapon. The first mining charge detonated against a massive asteroid, not to destroy it, but to alter its trajectory. The rock, easily a mile across, began accelerating toward the approaching bioships. More charges fired, creating a cascade of moving mountains that converged on the Void Swarm from multiple angles. The bioships tried to adapt, growing thicker armor and stronger hulls. But there was no adapting to the simple physics of mass times velocity. when a million-ton asteroid traveling at 10 kilometers per second hits something. That something gets obliterated regardless of how tough it thinks it is. Direct hits on 47 bioships, Rick reported from sensors. They're trying to reinforce their hulls, but the mathematics don't work in their favor. Jake watched the tactical display as more asteroids found their targets. The Void Swarm was learning, trying to predict the trajectories and avoid the improvised bombardment, but Tom was already 3 steps ahead, using the ship's computers to calculate intercept courses that took advantage of gravitational mechanics and orbital dynamics. Now they're learning, Tom observed with satisfaction as he watched the creatures attempt to counter his strategy. Perfect. Admiral Vextar's voice came over the communication channel, filled with something that might have been hope. Captain Morrison, your tactics are ... unprecedented. But how long can you maintain this assault? Jake looked out at the asteroid belt surrounding them. Millions of rocks, from tiny pebbles to massive planetoids, all of them potential weapons in human hands. Admiral, Jake said calmly, we've got about 10 billion asteroids to work with. The question isn't how long we can keep this up. The question is whether these creatures can adapt fast enough to survive what comes next. The Mozart continued playing across all frequencies as the EU's defiance began the deadly dance that would determine the fate of the Krellian Empire. In the distance, more Void Swarm bioships emerged from hyperspace, drawn by the destruction of their advanced scouts. Jake smiled grimly. Round 2, coming up. The asteroid belt had become a graveyard of twisted metal and organic matter. Chunks of destroyed bioships drifted between the rocks, their adaptive hulls still twitching as if trying to repair damage that was beyond healing. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as another wave of Void Swarm creatures approached, their forms already showing modifications from the previous engagement. They're learning faster, reported Lieutenant Amy Chen, studying the sensor readings. The new arrivals have reinforced their hulls against kinetic impact. They're also moving in tighter formations to minimize asteroid strikes. Jake nodded. He had expected this. The creatures were predictable in their predictability. They encountered a threat, analyzed it, and developed a countermeasure. It was efficient, logical, and ultimately, their weakness. Tom, what's the status on our mining charges? Lieutenant Tom Bradley looked up from his engineering station, sweat beading on his forehead. We're down to 30% reserves, Captain. The asteroid bombardment worked great, but these new bioships are too smart to fall for the same trick twice. Jake studied the tactical display. The approaching Void Swarm had learned to use the asteroids as cover, weaving between the larger rocks and avoiding the open spaces where the humans could manipulate trajectories. They were also probing ahead with smaller organisms, testing for traps and unexpected attacks. Time to show them what human creativity really looks like, Jake said. Tom, suit up. You're leading a boarding party. The bridge fell silent. Even Amy, who had served with Jake for 3 years, looked shocked. Sir, Tom said carefully. Did you just order me to board enemy vessels, in space, with hand tools? That's exactly what I ordered. Take Mike Foster, Danny Webb, and 6 others. Plasma cutters, magnetic boots, and portable oxygen. You're going to do some interior decorating on those bioships. Tom grinned, the same expression he wore when presented with an impossible engineering problem. Aye, Captain. This should be interesting. 20 minutes later, Tom Bradley and his team launched from the Defiance in what the Krellians would later describe as the most insane military maneuver they had ever witnessed. 8 humans in spacesuits, armed with industrial cutting tools, jetted directly toward bioships the size of skyscrapers. The Void Swarm creatures barely registered the tiny human signatures. Their sensors were designed to track massive threats like battleships and energy weapons. A few small bipeds and environmental suits didn't even qualify as a minor nuisance. That was their mistake. Tom landed on the hull of the nearest bioship with a magnetic clamp that would have made a metalworker proud. The creature's living surface rippled beneath his boots, trying to shake him off. But human magnetic technology was designed to work in the zero-gravity environments that had killed countless spacewalkers over the centuries. "Okay, people," Tom's voice came over the comm system. "Remember the briefing. These things have central nervous systems. Find the brain, cut the connections, and watch them stop adapting real quick." Lieutenant Mike Foster was already cutting through the hull of his target, his plasma cutter sending sparks into the vacuum. "Contact. I'm through the outer layer. This stuff feels like, I don't know, muscle tissue mixed with steel cables." "That's because it is," Tom replied, working his own cutter deeper into the bioship's hull. "These creatures are half organic, half machine. The organic parts feel pain." Commander Talon's voice exploded over the communication channel from the Krellian flagship. "Human vessel, what are your people doing?" "Our sensors show them attacking the bioships with hand tools." "Yep," Jake replied calmly from the bridge of the Defiance. "Standard human boarding procedure. This is madness. You're fighting in vacuum, with cutting tools. No species does that." Mike Foster's laughter echoed over the comm as he severed what looked like a major nerve cluster. His target bioship convulsed, its movement becoming erratic. "Madness. This is just Tuesday for us, Bug Boy." The Void Swarm creatures tried to adapt to this new threat, but there was no adapting to humans who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. They grew thicker hulls, but the humans found weak points. They developed internal defenses, but the humans were already inside, cutting their way toward vital systems with the persistence of termites. "I've found something interesting," reported Danny Webb from inside his target. "These things have what looks like a central processing unit. It's organic, but it's definitely coordinating the adaptive responses." "Cut it," Tom ordered. "Already on it." This plasma cutter goes through alien brain tissue like butter. The bioship Danny was attacking suddenly went limp, drifting helplessly as its adaptive systems shut down. Within minutes, 3 more creatures had suffered the same fate as the human boarding parties found and severed their neural cores. But the Void Swarm was learning from this attack too. The remaining bioships began generating electrical fields around their hulls, trying to fry the human boarders. They developed internal antibodies that attacked anything foreign in their systems. The humans adapted faster. "Electrical field. Number problem," Mike called out, activating an insulation protocol in his suit. "My gear is rated for solar flare exposure." This tickles. Tom had encountered the antibody problem and solved it in his typically direct fashion. "These immune responses are organic. Amy, can you synthesize some of that industrial solvent we use for cleaning plasma conduits?" "Already done." Amy's voice came from the Defiance. "Transmitting the formula to your suit fabricators now." Within minutes, the human boarding parties were armed with chemical weapons that dissolved organic tissue on contact. The bioship's immune systems couldn't adapt fast enough to counter industrial chemicals designed to clean the most stubborn residue from starship engines. Captain Morrison watched from his bridge as the impossible became routine. His people were fighting inside living starships, adapting to every defense the creatures could develop, and somehow making it look easy. The Krellian fleet hung back, their crews stunned into silence by what they were witnessing. Admiral Vex finally found his voice. "Captain Morrison, how are your people surviving this? They should be dead a dozen times over." Jake looked at the tactical display, where 8 human signatures continued to move through the bioships like antibodies through a bloodstream. Several of them were wounded, their medical monitors showing injuries that would have hospitalized most species. But they kept fighting. "Admiral," Jake said, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead where a piece of shrapnel had struck him during the last exchange. "Humans come from a planet where everything tries to kill us from the moment we're born. Our weather can freeze or cook us. Our animals hunt in packs. Our plants are poisonous. Our bacteria are constantly trying to eat us from the inside. He paused, watching as Mike Foster emerged from a bioship that was now completely dead in space. This isn't war for us. This is just another day at the office. The Void Swarm creatures tried one last adaptation. They began to self-destruct when humans boarded them, hoping to take the attackers with them. But even this desperate measure failed. The humans had encountered suicide bombers before, both biological and mechanical. They simply adjusted their tactics, cutting the self-destruct mechanisms first, and then proceeding with their mission. Tom Bradley's voice came over the comm, cheerful despite the fact that he was currently floating in space after his target had tried to explode. Captain, we've neutralized 12 bioships. The rest of the swarm is pulling back. I think we've got their attention. Jake smiled as he watched the remaining Void Swarm creatures retreat toward the outer system. They were regrouping, adapting, preparing for the next engagement. But they had learned something important about humans. They didn't fight like any other species in the galaxy. Good work, people. Return to ship for medical checkup and debriefing. And Tom? Yes, Captain. Next time, try not to get blown up. The paperwork is murder. The last bioship of the Void Swarm drifted silently through space. Its massive hull split open like a cracked egg. Lieutenant Tom Bradley floated nearby in his damaged spacesuit, plasma cutter still smoking in his gloved hands. The creature that had terrorized an entire galaxy for months was finally dead. Its adaptive systems overwhelmed by something it had never encountered before. Humans who refused to give up. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as debris from the final battle scattered across the asteroid belt. His ship looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Hull plates were missing, entire sections were venting atmosphere, and half the crew was in medical bay. But they were alive, and the Void Swarm was not. Final casualty report, Amy, Jake said, settling into his captain's chair with a wince. A piece of shrapnel had caught him in the ribs during the last engagement, and the pain reminded him that even humans had limits. Lieutenant Amy Chen looked up from her damaged console, exhaustion clear in her voice. 37 wounded, 8 serious but stable. No fatalities, Captain. Medical says everyone will make a full recovery. Jake nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. In 18 hours of continuous combat against an enemy that had destroyed entire fleets, they hadn't lost a single person. It was the kind of impossible outcome that would have seemed like fantasy to anyone who hadn't witnessed human stubbornness firsthand. The communication system crackled to life, filled with voices speaking in dozens of alien languages. The Krellian fleet was celebrating, their crews cheering in their insectoid language, while other species that had been monitoring the battle added their own congratulations. News of the Void Swarm's defeat was already spreading across the galaxy. Admiral Vextar's image appeared on the main screen, his crystalline eyes bright with something Jake had never seen from a Krellian before: genuine gratitude. The alien commanders' forearms moved in what Jake recognized as a formal salute. Captain Morrison, Vextar said, his translator working overtime to convey the emotion in his voice. The Krellian Empire owes humanity a debt that cannot be repaid. In a single day, you have accomplished what our finest warriors could not achieve in months of warfare. We would be honored to sponsor your species for membership in the Galactic Council. Jake felt his crew's eyes on him. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The recognition that humanity deserved a place among the galaxy's great civilizations. But as he looked at Admiral Vextar's hopeful expression, Jake knew that the Krellians still didn't understand what had really happened here. That's very generous, Admiral, Jake said carefully. But we've been in the galaxy longer than you think. Amy's fingers moved across her console, and the main screen shifted to display a three-dimensional star map. Red dots appeared across multiple sectors, each one representing a human presence. There were dozens of them, scattered throughout Krellian. space and beyond. Admiral Vexstar stared at the display, his translator making confused, buzzing sounds. What am I looking at, Captain? Human colonies, Jake replied simply. Established over the past 5 years while you were dealing with various other threats. We're not just explorers who answered your distress call, Admiral. We've been your neighbors for quite some time. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could see the moment when understanding dawned in the Krellian commander's compound eyes. The implications hit him like a physical blow, and his forearms trembled as the truth sank in. You're not refugees, Vexstar whispered. You're not even explorers. You're colonizers. Jake's expression remained neutral, but there was steel underneath his calm demeanor. We prefer the term immigrants, Admiral, and as you've just seen, we're excellent neighbors. We respond to distress calls, we help fight off galaxy monsters, and we ask for very little in return. Amy pulled up another display showing human trade routes, research stations, and diplomatic outposts. What the Krellians had assumed was a single ship answering their call was actually the tip of an iceberg that stretched across half the galaxy. While you were fighting the Void Swarm, Jake continued, human survey teams were mapping habitable worlds. Our construction crews were building infrastructure. Our scientists were studying local phenomena. We've been very busy. Commander Talon's voice came over the communication channel, his translator struggling with what sounded like panic. How many of you are there? How long have you been expanding? Tom Bradley's voice answered from across the bridge, where he was running diagnostics on their damaged weapons systems. Long enough to know that this galaxy has some serious pest control problems. Good thing we're here to help. Admiral Vexstar was staring at the star map, counting the human settlements that had appeared as if by magic. You planned this. The distress call, the battle. You used our crisis as an opportunity to reveal yourselves. Jake shook his head. Admiral, we would have helped you whether it revealed our presence or not. That's what humans do. But yes, we've been preparing for the day when we'd need to announce ourselves to the galaxy. The Void Swarm just provided the perfect opportunity. The realization of what this meant was spreading through the Krellian fleet. The species they had thought of as primitive newcomers had been operating under their noses for years. Every assumption they had made about human capabilities had been wrong. The question now, Jake said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who held all the cards, is whether you want us as allies or competitors. We've proven we can defend this galaxy against external threats. We've also proven that we're here to stay. Amy brought up another display, showing human technological capabilities, trade agreements with other species, and defensive pacts that the Krellians had never known existed. The humans hadn't just been expanding randomly. They had been building a network, creating relationships, establishing themselves as a galactic power. Admiral Vexstar was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what he was seeing. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and unease. What kind of world creates beings like you? What kind of environment produces a species that can defeat the Void Swarm in a single day, while simultaneously colonizing half the galaxy? Tom Bradley looked up from his repairs, plasma cutter still in his hands, his spacesuit scorched from his latest boarding action. He grinned at the Krellian commander through the video link. The kind of world that prepares you for a galaxy full of things that want to eat you, Admiral. Earth taught us that the universe is hostile. Adaptation is survival, and the only way to guarantee your safety is to be tougher than everything else out there. Jake stood up from his captain's chair, ignoring the pain in his ribs. Admiral the Krellian Empire has a choice to make. You can work with us to build a safer, more prosperous galaxy, or you can compete with us for resources and territory. Either way, humanity is here to stay. The communication channel fell silent as the implications sank in throughout the Krellian fleet. The species that had ruled this sector for 3,000 years was no longer alone at the top of the food chain. As the UES Defiance limped toward the nearest human outpost for repairs, Jake looked out at the stars and smiled. The galaxy had just learned that Earth's children were no longer content to stay in their corner of space. The age of human expansion had officially begun, and the universe would never be the same.